everyone. I'm Krishna Karwa, a senior research analyst with iFast Financial India Private Limited. In today's video, we will touch upon the relevance of passive debt investing and also talk about two products from Nippon AMC stable. Joining us on this call today are two individuals from the AMC, Mr. Amit Tripathi, who is the Chief Investment Officer for fixed income for the fixed income division, and we also have Hemen Bhatia, who is the Deputy Head for the ETF business. So glad to have both of you on this call with us, and we look forward to your insights during the course of this conversation. So let me start off by asking Amit as to his outlook on the debt markets in India as of now, and how well does passive investing board at this juncture?
Okay. Thanks, Krishna, for having me. So essentially, the debt markets broadly seem to be in a good shape. Abundant liquidity in the system, very low repo rate setting, monetary policy has been extremely accommodative over the past 18 to 24 months post-COVID. And in fact, even pre-COVID, we were in an accommodation phase for 12 months prior to that. So to that extent, I think the debt markets seem to be in reasonable shape as far as the various markets, whether it is GSEC market, corporate bond market, money markets are concerned. Going forward, clearly we have already seen the end of the rate cut cycle. We have also possibly seen the peak liquidity as far as system liquidity is concerned. But the things that are supporting the debt markets, if I were to just put them point-wise, first, these abundant liquidity conditions are going to continue for some more time, which essentially is supportive for the entire yield curve as well as for spreads. Second, RBI has had a very balanced approach towards policy setting during this cycle, where they have clearly stated that they are looking at twin objectives of managing both growth and inflation. And given that we are somewhere midway in terms of ascertaining the sustainability of growth and also some part of inflation fears that we have seen in the last 12 months are in RBI's mind itself slightly transitory in nature, we have a very patient approach being taken by the RBI, both in terms of policy setting as well as in terms of liquidity in the system. So to that extent, I think the benign conditions with some tweaks here and there will most likely continue over the next 12 to 18 months, which augurs well for the debt markets in general. The second thing that is relevant for debt markets, obviously, is the fiscal position of the government. Now, after having a slightly tough time during COVID, we have started this year on a reasonably positive note. The government's fiscal position is also improving, and since government, I mean the center plus state together are the biggest borrowers in India, an improvement in the fiscal position of the government itself also augurs well for the markets in general. Third, corporate balance sheets possibly are in the best shape if I were to look at it in the context of the past 3 years, notwithstanding the disruptions that we have seen during COVID. And to that extent, I believe that the credit quality of generally the issuers who are approaching the market are reasonable. And in fact, most of the issuers who have been approaching the market in the past 12 months have been reasonably high quality issuers. So if I look at it from a monetary policy setting perspective, from a fiscal perspective, as well as from corporate balance sheet perspective, I think things are on the positive side. The volatility, obviously, in the market that we have seen in the past and going forward, or the uncertainty, so to say, can come from two things. One, obviously, is that we are in a cusp as far as growth and inflation is concerned. There is a reasonable amount of uncertainty on growth and inflation, as all of us know. To that extent, we might see slight volatility in the market going forward. And second, that as the RBI will eventually start normalization, now that we are kind of out of that extreme COVID phase, you will see some drawdown in liquidity, some drawdown in rates in the near term. When I say near term, I'm essentially talking 12 to 24 months. And to that extent, you will see some adjustments in the market from time to time. And because of these two reasons, one thing is very important from an investor standpoint, that while one remains generally positively inclined, one should also take into account that the interim volatility in the markets can be slightly higher in the next 12 to 24 months than what was the case in the past 12 to 18.
You touched upon everything quite comprehensively, and I'm sure it will be quite reassuring for investors to know that the debt markets are stable. Something that a lot of people did fear since the onset of COVID. So glad to hear that. And now we have seen, especially starting this year, the rise of passive debt as a strategy. So in your opinion, what makes it a worthy proposition at this point in time?
So, for coming to this passive debt argument, or the fact that passive debts have become very popular, we just step back and look at why they are becoming popular right now. The first thing is, if you look at it from any investor standpoint, where does the investor start? The investor generally starts with the overall asset allocation of his surpluses or his savings or investment that he has. That asset allocation is based on certain goals that the investor is trying to achieve. Some investor is trying income maximization, some investor is trying to meet some specific goals at some specific point in time, etc., etc. Once that broader asset allocation is done, and suppose an X percentage the investor is supposed to invest into fixed income, as long as that percentage of allocation is reasonably sure, known to the investor, as long as the tenor of his investments are reasonably known to the investor, possibly passive strategies offer the simplest solutions available to meet those requirements. Passive strategies by definition are less complicated. Passive strategies by definition require less view taking as far as markets are concerned. Passive strategies by definition, in many cases, for example, that we have seen recently, where we are talking about target maturity passive strategies, actually come with a finite date in mind. So to that extent, I think from an investor asset allocation perspective, from a visibility perspective, and from his goal matching perspective, passive strategies work very well. The second thing, which has also given some, or I would say also shifted some amount of investor allocations to passive, is also the fact that we had a difficult period between 2018 and 2021, pre-COVID and during COVID, earlier because of some credit events, later because of a mix of interest rate volatility along with credit events and higher uncertainty. To that extent, because, as I said, passive is much less complicated from a fund management perspective, the investors know what they are getting into. That certainty element of passive scheme also, to my mind, is a reasonable driver for why passive has attracted so much. So I would say visibility, certainty, ability to match your goals in terms of timing of investments, better visibility in terms of potential returns to some extent, are all the factors which have led to this growth in passive. And I think going forward also, I am reasonably sure that when it comes to plain vanilla, straight jacketed asset allocation solutions that an investor is looking at, and when he has a well-defined time horizon, or he has a very well-defined understanding in terms of the risk returns that he wants to look at, passive funds always offer a good fit. So it's a new phenomena, but it's a phenomena that is likely to catch more and more as we go.
Sounds interesting, Amit. And clearly this trend is here to stay and to grow. We'd also like to understand as to what steps is Nippon taking to tap this opportunity and help investors arrive at the right fund selection.
So basically, when we look at passive strategies, we typically, as a fund house, would get a lot of input from our own internal teams, both the product guys at Nippon, in fact, Hemen heads that at Nippon, so he can give you input there as well, along with the sales team in terms of giving us feedback on what are the possible tenors, what structures, portfolios that would be best suited to meet investor requirements. So, see, what we need to understand here is active passive is the second step. The first step is that am I going to offer a product that meets investor requirements? Requirements from the perspective of risk return, requirements from the perspective of simplicity, requirements from the purpose of visibility, and then I figure out whether an active fund is best suited for that or a passive fund is best suited for that. Ultimately, the way you look at AMCs is AMCs are manufacturers of products, and then they have the responsibility of fiduciary managing the product once they have manufactured it and once client money has come in, because every product comes with a specific mandate. So wherever we see passive funds can fulfill that specific mandate of investors, and wherever we see that there is a investor appetite for those type of mandates, those mandates are discussed based on feedback received from the sales team. The product team works on those mandates, consults the sales team and the investment team in terms of our ability to execute those mandates seamlessly over medium to long periods, and then only you launch product. So this is all driven in a sense in terms of the requirements of the investor, first of all, the assessment of that requirement, can it be delivered in a particular format? Is that format a sustainable format where we can continuously deliver it over a period of time? Because it's not that money will come only on one day, right? Money will come over a period of time. So you need to replicate, for example, if you're talking about passive funds, you need to be able to deliver that strategy time and again, every time money comes in and goes out. So the sustainability of that also is looked at when we are looking at passive products. Till now, if you look at the passive products that we have launched, first of all, I think passive strategies work best when you are talking about liquid asset classes. So most of them are high grade, sovereign, quasi-sovereign kind of asset classes because replication is easier. And second, we have done passive strategies on the target maturity side, and 2 or 3 on an ongoing basis, which are normal ETF products. So we have done it in government securities, central government securities, state government securities, PSU bonds, etc., ranging from 3-4 years till 8-10 years, etc.
So clearly a lot of thought process involved out there, and these are solutions that investors will definitely find quite helpful, as you rightly attributed.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yes. So all right, with that backdrop in mind, it's now time to shift our focus to 2 products from Nippon AMC. Both are ETFs, one of which is a combination of CPSE bonds and state development loans, which matures in 2024, whereas the other pertains to state development loans that mature in 2026. So, hi Hemen, can you please take us through the product features and elaborate on the same?
Yeah, sure. See, both of these products are structured on the concept of target maturity. Hence, both this product will have a defined maturity and which will be in line with the termination date of the underlying index, which both these products will follow. And as a strategy, as an investment strategy, both these products are going to follow buy and hold strategy in line with the index. Hence, the maturity, the average maturity of both my ETFs will be in line with the maturity of the underlying index, and it will keep rolling down till the maturity of the index. So these are 2 key features. Now there are few key investment rationale why somebody should consider this fund. Obviously, first and foremost, given the underlying is AAA, CPSE, and SDLs. In terms of the credit we are offering the investors, the product having the highest safety because one is a bond issued on behalf of the state government, and another is AAA CPSE, wherein the promoter is Government of India. So highest safety is one of the key features which we are offering. Additionally, given that this is a target maturity fund and will use buy and hold strategy, on relative terms, both the products will provide relative visibility and stability in terms of what kind of returns the product may have. Because of the bond-like structure, which the based on which the fund is, both the ETFs are structured. In terms of taxation, the product taxation will be same like any other debt fund. Hence, the product will offer the benefit of indexation and will be relatively tax efficient as compared to maybe a lot of other traditional products in the market. There's no lock-in in this product because it is structured as an open-ended target maturity fund. Hence, an investor can enter anytime and exit anytime during the life of the fund till its maturity. But as a manufacturer, we will recommend that any investor entering in this product should enter with the objective of holding the units till the maturity in order to avoid the volatility during the life of the product. So no lock-in is again one of the key features. And a lot of non-systemic risk, as Amit also discussed, they get reduced because there's no security selection, there's no portfolio manager selection. Buy and hold strategy will be followed. Hence, a lot of those non-systemic risks get reduced. So these are few of the key features of both of our ETFs.
And yes, the definite maturity as well as the tax advantages do give it an edge over fixed deposits.
Yes.
Hemin, you spoke about these products being passive in nature. We'd also like to understand as to how the underlying benchmark of these bonds is constituted.
Yeah, sure. We'll start with the AAA CPSE and SDL, which is a 50-50 index. So again, the CPSE portion, for the CPSE portion, top 10 CPSEs are selected by the index provider based on the liquidity criteria, which they call as composite liquidity score. Now, what does composite liquidity score consist of? So the score is calculated based on 80% weightage given to the total traded value of the different issuers falling in the particular maturity bucket. So 80% weightage is given to that, 10% weightage is given to the number of trades, and balance 10% weightage is given to the total number of days traded. So that's how the composite liquidity score is calculated by the index provider. And based on the composite liquidity score, all the CPS issuers are ranked, and out of which top 10 issuers, top 10 AAA CPS issuers are selected by the index provider. Once we have the issuers in place, the next logical thing is select a particular I sign. So again, the I sign is selected based on the same methodology of the composite liquidity score. So whichever is the most liquid I sign of a particular issuer, that particular I sign will represent the issuer in the index. So one I sign per issuer will be part of the index. Now, once we have the issuer and the I signs, particular I signs in place, the next thing is distributing the weightages to those issuers. So given that this is a 50-50 index, wherein 50% weightage is given to the CPSEs, divide that 50% weightages into 10 bonds, 10 issuers. So not more than 5% weightage given to a particular CPSE issuer at the time of index launch. Now coming to the SDL portion, again, for the SDLs, what the index provider does is it selects the top 5 SDLs based on their outstanding in a particular maturity bucket, which we are looking 23-24, 2023 to 2024. And once those top 5 SDL states are selected, whichever is the latest issued I sign or SDL for a particular state, that I sign will represent that state in the index. Now, in terms of the weighted distribution, again, 50% weightage is divided into those 5 states. So not more than 10% weightage given to a particular state at the time of index launch. this is how the AAA CPSE and SDL index is constructed. The another product which we have is 100% SDL product maturing in 2026. So again, for SDL, the methodology prepared by the index provider is the same. Top 20 states are selected based on their outstanding, and whichever is the latest issued SDL for a particular state, that ISIN will represent that state in the index. And 100% weightage will be divided into these 20 states. So not more than 5% weightage given to a particular state at the time of index launch. So all these weightages, etc., which we discussed, are at the time of index launch. Once the index was launched, before the fund started, thereon the weightages will keep on moving with the drift in the prices of the underlying securities, which represented as represented in the index. So this is the overall construct of both the ETF 2024 and 2026 ETF, which we are discussing.
So clearly, apart from the benefit of diversification, you are investing in the best of the debt instruments that the class has to offer.
Yes.
So, okay, on that note, let me get back to Amit and ask him as to what makes these two segments, that is CPSEs and SDLs, relevant in the context of the passive debt space right now.
Okay, so essentially, as I was saying earlier, and Hemant also talked about it, see, there are two things that are very important in a passive debt scheme. The first thing is that typically, since these are passive strategies, we are essentially trying to attain a particular objective of capturing a certain type of a product profile. And here, since high grade portfolios are what is the most popular product profile in the market, whether open-ended or closed-ended format. The constituents are predominantly high grade, as Hemant also said, they are either sovereign or quasi-sovereign. More important, as I also mentioned earlier, an index is not something that should be only beautiful to look at. An index is also something that needs to be replicated day in and day out. One of the key features whenever we talk about constitution of any index is the underlying liquidity of the issuers in that index, their availability, our ability to buy and sell based on subscription redemptions in the primary, secondary markets without any impact or with minimal impact. So that is another reason why you typically stick to high grade in these portfolios, because you are trying to replicate an index. You are not trying to value add anything on top of that. So your job or incentive here is to replicate an index with the lowest impact at the market prices that prevail at that point in time. That's another reason why we would go with a high grade portfolio. Now, if you talk about high grade instruments, clearly in the order of defining high grade, you will typically have sovereign instruments at the top, and then quasi-sovereign instruments, which are again the highest credit quality instruments. But along with that, an additional feature that not only are they highest credit quality, but also the parentage is sovereign, and that's why I'm using the word quasi-sovereign loosely. So we are talking about AAA public sector undertakings here, which are directly, indirectly held by the government of India. So to that extent, we have chosen or we have restricted ourselves only to the top most tier quality as far as the underlying portfolio is concerned, so as to minimize credit risk, and at the same breath, also the fact that as a corollary, these instruments also tend to be most liquid. So you are minimizing credit risk at one level, you are ensuring minimum impact cost in terms of replicating the index at another level, and you are ensuring that because this strategy not only has to play out at the time of launch, but also over a period of time continuously, these instruments are the most issued, available, traded instruments in the market, and hence it is very easy for you to replicate the index on a sustainable basis when you have these types of constitutions.
Quite clearly an advantage from an ETF point of view, where liquidity is what a lot of people emphasize on. So Hemin, getting back to you, what would the maximum exposure to a particular bond or sector be, and how often are these underlying indices, both on the CPSE and the SDL front, reconstituted by the NSE?
Yeah. See, as per the regulatory guidelines, while an index is constructed, any issuer cannot have more than 15% weightage in the index. Hence, while constructing the index, we've taken due care that both in case of AAA CPSE and SDL, and even in case of 100% SDL portfolio, we don't have more than a 5 to 10% weightage given to assigned to a particular issuer in the index, in order to avoid this kind of frequent rebalancing because of the issuer limits being hit. So 15% is a threshold. And to answer your second question, when do these indices rebalance? See, indices will rebalance only in three scenarios. One is, as we discussed, if any of the issuer hits 15% limit, which in our case, we don't foresee any issuer hitting 15% in the near future or during the life of the product. Another is in case there's any downgrade below AAA, then the index will have to be rebalanced. So again, in our portfolio, we have only AAA CPSEs. Hence, we don't foresee any kind of downgrade because of the government of India being the promoter and having majority shareholding in each of the CPSEs. And third is in case any of the CPSE gets divested and gets privatized, then the index will have to be rebalanced. So these are the three scenarios in which the index will be rebalanced, and the index provider will keep reviewing these scenarios on calendar quarterly basis. And if required, they may rebalance the index, and our portfolio will be aligned in line with any of the rebalances which may happen in the index. But to be honest, practically, we do not see any kind of rebalances because of the way we've structured, the index provider has structured the index with the underlying CPSEs and SDLs.
Okay. And also another thing, that in the context of the CPSE and the SDL combo, which matures in 2024, how often would Nippon look to rebalance between these two?
Yeah, so as I said, see, given that the fund is going to hold, fund is going to use buy and hold strategy, wherein the fund will keep try to mimic the index as much as possible. There will be no buying or selling or any call which will be taken by any fund manager. We have to keep revolving around the index basis the regulatory guidelines. Hence, unless the index gets rebalanced or any inclusions or exclusions happen in the index because of the reasons which we discussed, there will be no basically rebalancing or inclusions or exclusions which may happen in the fund. Nevertheless, I would like to point this out that see, the objective of the fund is to keep mimicking the index as much as possible, but because of the nuances in the debt market, regulatory guidelines allow the ETF to keep buying similar kind of securities in the index. While I say similar, similar in terms of the credit profile, the type of securities, and the modified duration of the issuers or say iSigns which are part of the index. So our portfolio, ETF portfolio will keep revolving around the index issuers, keeping in mind these two or three things in line with the regulatory guidelines. But additionally, there will be no calls or no inclusion or exclusion made other than required for the inflows and outflows.
Sure. So that should augur well in terms of the exposures to both segments for individuals who opt for the fund. Now, getting back to Amit, we all know that, yes, active debt funds have been around for a long time, and they've clearly been popular among investors. But now with these new set of products coming in, we'd also like to know how different these funds could be versus active funds of a similar nature, and why they warrant inclusion in one's portfolio.
So I think at the margin, they actually are solving for slightly different things as far as the investor is concerned. As I started, or in my opening remarks that I mentioned, where passive fits in best is if you have specific requirements, either very specific in terms of asset quality, or very specific in terms of investment horizon, or very specific in terms of constitution of the portfolio. You are trying to meet a specific goal in terms of time horizon, etc., etc. Where passive does not fit in is to take advantage of various opportunities that come in the market from time to time, which can happen at various points on the yield curve, for example. Sometimes a 5-year yield might be more attractive than a 2-year yield, a 10-year yield might be more attractive than a 5-year yield, and vice versa. You are not actively trying to increase or decrease interest rate or credit risk in the portfolio at any point in time. So effectively, any kind of value addition which an active portfolio strategy can do, obviously passives are not trying to attempt. Okay? So one way of looking at this is that there is always this part of your portfolio allocation that will be very, very goal based, or you might want much more visibility, clarity, both in terms of time horizon, or in terms of potential returns, or in terms of potential volatility, or in terms of predictability, etc., etc. I think passives provide that more. But if you are looking at any kind of value addition, either in terms of maximizing risk, in terms of maximizing returns, in terms of dynamically managing risk, in terms of taking advantage of various opportunities that are offered in the market, then obviously passive is not the answer. For that, you have to come to active. And I firmly believe that in India, at least as of today, this space for both exists, and this space for both will exist going forward. So first of all, it's not that just because you have a market, all parts of that market can be replicated easily. And as I said, passive should be done, or has to be ideally done only in cases where replication on an ongoing basis is seamless. So if you are facing those disadvantages, obviously passive is not the choice. If you want the fund manager to take advantage of market conditions and generate higher returns for you, passive is not the choice. So to that extent, I think there is a space for active. But like I said, passive offer uncomplicated, lesser cluttered, visible, goal-oriented, time-bound in some cases strategies that might fit many of the asset allocation requirements of investors from time to time. So I guess there is space for both, and I think both offer slightly different, or I would say reasonably different opportunities and options to the investors. So depending on what is your requirement, that is what should help you decide whether you choose the active versus the passive.
So yes, a subjective call out there, and investors may want to assess their own risk profiles and investment horizons.
Right. And investment objectives.
Absolutely. Hemin, you spoke previously about how liquid the market is for CPSE and STL bonds, and more specifically, the ones that these two funds are trying to replicate. We were curious to know as to what happens in case if large sale volumes are involved. So in that case, how would Nippon AMC manage liquidity?
See, as a feature of the ETF, ETFs can be purchased and sold in two ways. One is directly with the AMC. So any investor wanting to subscribe or redeem directly with the AMC, they will have to come to the AMC in certain lot size. So for example, for 2024 ETF, the lot size is 2.3 lakh units, close to 2.8 4 to 2.5 crores, depending on whatever is the real time or say the executed now. For 2026 ETF, the lot size is 5 lakh units, so close to 5 crore plus is the lot size in rupee terms, depending on whatever is the real time or say the executed now. So that is one way of providing liquidity to the investors. Another way is, given that ETF is listed on the stock exchange, investors can buy and sell in a lot size of 1 unit, like any other stock. And there will be we have our own market makers which are appointed, who will provide liquidity on the stock exchange for the investors wanting to buy and sell in a smaller lot size and who cannot come directly to the AMC. So those will typically be say a lot of retail as well as HNI investors wanting to invest in lesser than lot sizes. So liquidity, like any other ETFs, is very much available in both these ETFs as well. And one thing is very clear: as long as the underlying securities are liquid, the ETF can be as much liquid, and liquidity can will never be an issue for the ETFs as long as the underlying securities are liquid.
Sure. Amit, your thoughts on this, please?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? My thoughts.
Yes, your thoughts on the liquidity bit as well.
So I think Heyman has already talked about how investors can get liquidity in their units. One thing that he actually pointed out, and which I think I have repeated already 3-4 times in this call itself, is the fact that for a unit to be liquid, the underlying needs to be liquid, right? For the unit to be quoted at lower spreads, the underlying has to be quoted at lower spreads. So in effect, if the index selection is proper, if the index constituents are proper, if they are liquid and can be transacted with lower impact cost, ultimately that all results into more liquidity in the final unit also, which is traded either in the secondary markets or in directly with the mutual fund. So to that extent, I don't think I have any significant difference with what Heyman said. And I think the only focus, as we have been saying again and again on this call, is that we believe that at least initial days yet, and the markets can develop a lot over the years. We have not even scratched the surface for that matter. But right now, our focus is clearly that we should only deliver or try to replicate indices which are inherently very liquid, so that we can give a good service in terms of entry and exit to investors as and when they require.
Sure, and that definitely again adds a bit a reassuring tone to people who get worried about the sale volumes. Heyman, what would the expense ratios be like for these two ETFs with the 2024 and 2026 maturities?
Yeah, so the expense ratio for both of these ETFs is 15 basis points. That's the TR for both of these funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
And talking about the yields that one can expect from these couple of funds at this point, what would they be? Since both products seem to be following a roll down strategy. So Amit or Heyman, your answer to that.
I'll request Amit to take that question.
I don't have to answer that question for the simple reason that these are target maturity products, and everything is available. If you just go to the website and look at the details, you will yourself get to know the price. And Heyman, do we get to know the YTM of the product also on website? I'm not sure. So
no, the YTMs are not disclosed anywhere on the website. They are disclosed only on monthly basis.
So broadly speaking, just to give a ballpark understanding on this thing, the 2026 is sub 6 right now, and the 2025 is sub 5 right now. So that's the ballpark. So around 5% and around 6% is what are the ballpark numbers. Like I said, I don't want to stress too much on this aspect for the simple reason that these yields are market determined yields and they change every day. So to that extent, I think the relationship managers and the market makers can be more helpful when the investor decides to check on these specific aspects.
And if one were to invest in a staggered manner over a period of time, one would derive the pro rata yields.
You get the yield that exists on an execution that happens specifically for your money on that given day.
Okay.
So it is very, very investor specific. So the beauty of an ETF is that if you as an investor come to me today, for example, at a point in time, I am supposed to execute your order through a transaction in the market. And whatever transaction I am doing, you are getting a NAV corresponding to that transaction itself. So for every inflow and outflow, I am supposed to be doing a transaction when your money is coming in and going out. So it's in that sense more than 100% transparent is what I can tell you, because I am actually supposed to also tell you the execution that I have done on your behalf. So that way it's the purest form of pass-through that you can imagine.
Absolutely. And I think with that, a lot of features, in fact, everything has been covered quite comprehensively by both of you. And clearly, passive debt investing as a theme is here to stay and grow by leaps and bounds as well. So at our end, we are quite clear about these nuances. Hemin, your concluding thoughts, if any, in the context of this theme or the two funds that we discussed today?
Yeah, sure. See, I believe this is a very beautiful concept, very well designed concept, and it can be very effectively used by the advisors and the investors for doing their asset allocation. Given the two key structures, two key features. One is the buy and hold strategy of the fund, and second is the defined maturity. So it's a very good concept, which we believe will grow leaps and bounds in future.
Amit, would you like to add something as well?
Yeah, I would say that most of the market products at this point in time, given that we have low rates in the traditional savings products, so most of the market products in that sense are giving reasonably attractive investment opportunities to investors. What an ETF in general and a target ETF in particular do is also give that much more visibility in terms of the tenors and the potential likely returns to the investors. So to that extent, I think it's a combination of three things which come together. One is efficiency in terms of directly getting the yields that are prevalent in the market. Two is marrying your requirements of your investment horizon with the product itself, because these are target maturity products. Three is potentially better returns that you can get in traditional savings instruments, given that these tend to be more efficient from a participation in the market perspective. So I think generally, and this part of this is also true about open-ended funds. It's not about specifically passive only, but passive adds to this added advantage of higher visibility and marrying your investment horizons with the product, or marrying the product with your investment horizons, which is an added advantage.
True. And on that note, I would like to thank both of you for taking out time and joining us here today. I'm sure whatever we've discussed will be very helpful and useful to the investor fraternity, not just to understand the concept, but also consider the couple of products that we discussed. Top-notch investment grade, good liquidity, definite yields, and a good alternative to active funds. So good luck on that note to Nippon AMC for its endeavors in this regard, and we look forward to connecting with all of you pretty soon.
Thank you.